So before we continue, there is something important that I want to note. The following three things all mean the same thing. They all are read as the sine of 72. So I can write it as the sine with parentheses and a 72. I can write it sine 72, no parentheses. I can write it as sine, parentheses, with 72 degrees on the inside. Now, no matter how I write this, that 72 is always referring to degrees, whether I put the symbol there or not. So the benefit for writing the symbol, that little circle for the degree symbol, is that it reminds you that it's always degrees. However, there are some common problems. Sometimes if you write that degree symbol, you might be sloppy in your handwriting and think it's a giant 0. And then you'd have 720, not 72. So as long as your handwriting is clean, you're welcome to write the degree symbol, although you actually don't have to. So if I ask you a question and I ask you to tell me the measure of the angle, that is when I particularly want you to use a degree symbol. If you're solving a question using this stuff, I will be okay if you skip the degree symbol. So all of these methods, they mean the exact same thing. The parentheses are here to tell you that it's taking an argument. It's a function. I'm putting something into it and I'll get something out. So for example, the sine of 72, it says I have the sine function. I'm going to plug 72 in and see what I get out. And I'll show you how to do that in a moment using your calculators. One other thing I should note, this middle version, sine 72, you are not multiplying sine times 72. That is not what is happening. You are still saying 72 is going inside the sine function. Okay, so here's the next page. We're going to focus right now on finding the steps for missing sides. So the steps to find those missing sides or angles and right triangles. The angle questions will come later. The side questions are what we're looking at right now. So now we're going to look at steps to find missing sides or angles in right triangles. The angle part will come later. Right now we are focusing on sides. And I've broken it down to a series of steps. The first step is to pick an acute angle. That means don't pick the right angle. It's not the 90 degrees. So you're going to pick an acute angle to stand at or to start from. From that angle's perspective, you're going to label the adjacent, opposite, and hypotenuse. Once you do that, write out a trig ratio. So think about SOH, CAH, TOA, so katoa. Solve for that missing side or angle on paper first. And that part's important. If you try jumping it into the calculator right away, you're more likely to make a mistake until you are very familiar with how to do this. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at example 1 here. They want us to use sine and cosine to find the missing sides. And at the end, we're going to round our answers to the nearest tenth. So I see that they gave me one angle. That's the angle I am going to start from. Okay, so I'm going to start from that angle there. I see the right angle, so it goes straight across, and I label this one over here as my hypotenuse. I then take a look and I say, well, I notice that y is touching this angle. It is adjacent to it. So ADJ for adjacent. And then when I go straight across all the way to the opposite side, x must be my opposite. I'm going to start by solving for x. Notice that x is the opposite. Notice they gave me the hypotenuse. So I'm going to start by doing the sine of 26. So again, notice that I'm using a method with a parenthesis. That is your choice. I'm going to write this over 1 equals, well, sine of 26. Remember, sine is the so, opposite over hypotenuse, so x over 14. Notice I've written it this way. That way, we are able to go ahead and cross multiply. So notice that I'm going to do 1 times x to get me x. So I'm multiplying along this diagonal. Then I multiply this way along that diagonal. So 14 times the sine of 26. When I do that multiplication, put the 14 on the far left-hand side. So 14 times sine of 26. And that's what I'm going to go ahead and put into my calculator. So to do this part, you need to have a scientific calculator. Here's an example. I'm going to go ahead and zoom this in here as much as I can. Okay. So on here, notice that I have sine, cosine, tangent. So I'm going to do 14 times, I'm going to hit the sine button. I'm going to type in 26, and I'm going to close it. One thing to watch for on the top of your calculator, make sure the D is turned on. I might also say DEG. This basically guarantees that your calculator is in degrees and not radians, something we'll look at later. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and you should get out a decimal. Now, they asked us to round to the nearest tenth, so I have 6.13, the nearest tenth. I check the 3. The 3 is less than 5, therefore the 1 stays. So my end answer for x is 6.1. So this is approximately 6.1, like that. Go ahead and zoom out again. Okay, so that's how we solved for x. Again, x is 6.1 approximately. Do the same process to solve for y. Notice that y is an adjacent, so we're going to use cosine. The cosine of 26 over 1 equals y over 14. And as before, I'm going to go ahead and cross multiply. 1 times y is just y. 14 times cosine of 26. 14 times the cosine of 26. And we're going to go ahead and type that into the calculator as before. So bring it back up. I'm going to go ahead and zoom this back in now. 14 times, hit the cosine symbol, 26. I have 12.58. This 8 is greater than 5, so it causes the first 5 to go up and become a 6. So basically I'm saying that 58 cents rounds up to 60 cents, 12.6. So approximately 12.6. So that's the value of y. That is the value of x. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing in the question down below. So go ahead and zoom out a little bit. Same deal here. I have an angle way up there. So this is the angle that we're looking at. This is the 70-degree angle. I have a right angle right here, meaning that this time x is my hypotenuse. Again, the right angle directly across from it is the hypotenuse. I'm going to use this short side here as my adjacent because it's a side touching the angle that is not the hypotenuse. So this here is my adjacent. And then if I go straight across to that 16, that is the opposite. Now notice that they did not ask me to find the adjacent side. We just want to solve for x. So x, hypotenuse, 16, opposite, and then that 70 there. Well, this means I'm going to be using sine because opposite over hypotenuse allows me to actually create a ratio here. So I'm going to be using, make sure I'm centered here. Here we go. I'm going to do sine of 70. And remember, whether I use parentheses, or I leave it plain, or I put a degree symbol, I'm still talking about the angle sitting right here. I've got sine of 70 degrees over 1 equals, and I have opposite over hypotenuse, so I have 16 over x. And this is a ratio. I'm going to go ahead and cross multiply. So I'm going to do x times sine 70. So x times sine of 70 equals 1 times 16 to get me 16. Now, with any question, my goal is to get x by itself. So I'm going to go ahead here and divide both sides by sine of 70. And this is why I'm saying don't type it into a calculator until the very last step. That's because if you type in sine of 70, you're going to get a decimal number. But I don't want you to be carrying around weird decimals. You do not want to round until the final step. Otherwise, you'll have a rounding error, and it'll get worse and worse the more times you have to round. So notice that I have divided both sides by sine of 70. So I have x equals 16 over sine of 70. And that's what I'm going to go ahead and type into my calculator. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom this in here. So again, 16 over sine 70. So coming over to here, my calculator has a fraction button. If you have yours, that's great. It might also say n over d for numerator over denominator. So 16 over sine of 70. I hit equal, I hit equals, and I get this number here, 17.02. And again, I'm rounding to the nearest tenth, so I'm just going to use 17. Again, notice that 2 is less than 5, so it keeps the number that was originally in that tenths place. 17.0 basically is 17. So x is approximately 17. For this next one, we're going to have to use tangent, and I'm going to show you why that will happen, whether they tell us to use tangent or not. So we're going to go ahead here, and I'm going to mark this angle. So again, we are standing at this angle right here. Notice that the hypotenuse is over here. It is that longest side across from that right angle symbol. Then I'm going to go ahead and label my adjacent. So my adjacent is x. X is adjacent to angle 32, so ADJ. And if I go straight across to find my opposite, that's going to be the 11. So I come over here and I go straight across. 11 is the opposite. So let's go ahead and zoom this in a little bit here. Let me kind of adjust this. There we go. Okay, so we notice that if I'm using the angle 32, I have opposite and adjacent. That is why I have to use tangent, whether they tell me to or not. So I'm going to come over to here. We're going to start by saying tangent of 32. So tan 32. And this equals, again, that's tan 32 over 1. It equals opposite over adjacent, which in our case is 11 over x. And we go ahead and cross multiply. Remember, I am dividing by 1 to remind you guys that you do have a ratio here that's going to allow you to do this cross multiplication and that simplification at the very end. So as I come across here, I have x times tangent of 32. So x tan 32. And I go across this way, 1 times 11 to get me 11. So x tan 32 equals 11. Oops, let me go ahead and shift this over. There we go. I'm going to go ahead now and divide both sides by the tangent of 32. So divide left and right by tan 32. And again, I'm doing this, that way the tangent 32s cancel out. I'm dividing by the same thing on both sides. That is part of my properties of equality. So x equals 11 over tan 32. And now I'm ready to go ahead and type that into the calculator. Okay, so here we go. I've got my fraction, 11 on the top. I go down to the bottom, tangent at the very end. I type in 32. And of course, I make sure that I am in degrees. That's a D. I hit enter. And I've got 17.6. So the value of x in this case is approximately 17.6. So x is approximately 17.6, and again, that's because I am still rounding to the nearest tenth. I'm going to do the same thing in this question down below. I'm going to use tangent again. My 56 degrees is sitting over here. So again, I'm labeling this angle. Remember, when I label angles, I can use arcs or dots. That choice is entirely up to you. My hypotenuse is across from that right angle. So this down here is my hypotenuse. If I go straight across from the angle I've chosen, x must be the opposite, which leaves 13 to be the adjacent. And again, it is adjacent because it is touching the angle I've chosen, but it's also not the hypotenuse. So 13 is my adjacent. I come back and take stock about what I have marked. I have angle, I have opposite, I have adjacent. Well, that is my TOA, meaning I have to use tangent. So I come back through here and I reset this up. My tangent of 56 over 1 equals opposite over adjacent, x over 13. I'm going to go ahead and cross multiply. 1 times x is x. 13 times tan 56 is what goes on the other side. So I'm going to type it into the calculator like that. And again, remember, whenever I multiply something to a sine, cosine, or tangent, I am always writing it on the left-hand side. That way I don't forget where it goes. I don't want you to accidentally put 13 inside the tan on the calculator, because that's a very different answer. So I'm going to type this in exactly as I see it. Come back to here. Let's clear it. I have 13 times tangent of 56. And I get out 19.27. Go and zoom in a bit. Remember that I am rounding to the nearest tenth. 7 is greater than 5, so that 2 becomes a 3. So I'm going to go ahead and write down 19.3 as my final answer. So in this case here, x is approximately 19.3. Okay, so this portion here is the practice portion. I will go through each question. However, I do recommend that you pause the video, go ahead and try it yourself, and then come back and see if you're right. But I am going to go through each question here. I'm going to start by going through practice A. For this set, they want us to use sine and cosine. They have given us the location of the 32 degrees. So we are starting here. Your hypotenuse is the 18. Y is your adjacent, x is your opposite. So if I go after x, I'm going to be using sine 32. So I'm going to say sine of 32 over 1. This equals opposite over hypotenuse, x over 18. I'm going to go ahead and cross multiply. 1 times x is x, which equals 18 times sine 32. And while this set of questions does not say round to the nearest tenth, we're still going to do that anyway right now. So you should get 18 times sine of 32, which will be 9.5. So x will be roughly 9.5. So that's what you should have gotten for the first one. I'm going to solve the second one now for y. So y is an adjacent, and I was given the hypotenuse, so I'm going to go ahead and use cosine. So I'm going to use cosine of 32 over 1 equals adjacent over hypotenuse, y over 18. I'm going to go ahead and cross multiply. 1 times y got me that y. I then have 18 times the cosine of 32. I'm going to go ahead, type that into a calculator. So I'm going to come backwards and say we're not using sine, we are using cosine. So there we go. And I get out 15.3. Remember, 0.26. If I'm rounding to the nearest tenth, that 6 kicks the 2 up to a 3, because 26 cents becomes 30 cents. So 15.3. So I'm going to go ahead and put that back in a frame for a moment. Alrighty, so that was your end answer for part A. I'm now going to go ahead and do part B. In this one, all they care about is finding n. So here's the angle that I'm standing at. N is across from the right angle. So n is the hypotenuse. The side length of 8 is across from the 50. So that must be the opposite. And this remaining one is the adjacent, but I don't have to use anything over there. So opposite and hypotenuse, that is sine. So I'm going to do sine of 50 equals opposite over hypotenuse, 8 over n. Let's make that with a 1 underneath. I'm going to go ahead and cross multiply. So I have n times sine 50 equals 8. So again, I did multiply along this diagonal, multiply along that diagonal. And I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by sine of 50. Okay, now remember, I am doing this to get n by itself. So these here are gone. N will be the result of 8 divided by sine of 50. And now we go ahead and we grab our calculators again. So come back to here, bring out my fraction bar, 8 divided by sine of 50, and that gives me 10.4. So that second 4 is still less than 5, which means the first 4 stays. Basically, 44 cents is closer to 40 cents than it is to 50 cents. So 10.4 is what we're going to go ahead and use. Okay, so here is question B in full frame. I'm going to go ahead and do C. And again, I encourage you to pause it, try it, and then see if you are right. Okay, so in this one, we're going to start with that 71 degrees. So we are starting at this angle right here. 5 is the hypotenuse. W is the adjacent. V is the opposite. I'm going to go ahead and start by solving for W. So W is adjacent, 5 is hypotenuse. That means I need to use cosine to begin here. So cosine of 71 over 1 equals adjacent over hypotenuse, that is W over 5. Going to go ahead and cross multiply. So I'm going to cross multiply. I'm going to get W equals 5 times the cosine of 71. And again, that's going to go straight into a calculator now. So I have 5 times the cosine of 71, and I get out 1.6. So then W is approximately 1.6. Okay, now for the next one, and that was W. Let's go ahead and go after V. So V is using the opposite, so I have to use sine. Sine of 71 over 1 will have to equal V over 5, opposite over hypotenuse. As before, go ahead and cross multiply. 1 times V gets us V, and it will equal 5 times the sine of 71. Go ahead and put that into the calculator. So we don't want a cosine, we want a sine, and that'll be 4.7. So 5 times sine of 71 is roughly 4.7. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at D. So in D, we are solving for P and Q. Okay, so I'm starting at this angle 64. 34 is the length of my hypotenuse. Q is my adjacent. P is my opposite. Opposite hypotenuse, that's going to use sine. So I'm going to say the sine of 64 over 1 equals opposite over hypotenuse, P over 34. And I'm going to go ahead and cross multiply. So P times 1 is P. On the other side, I now have 34 times the sine of 64. Go ahead and put it into a calculator and see what we get. Okay, so I've got 34 times the sine of 64, and I have 30.55. Remember that second 5 rounds the first one up 1 number. So I'm really going to be using 30.6. So the value of P will be approximately 30.6. Now we're going to go ahead and go after Q. Q is the adjacent hypotenuse. That means we're using cosine. So cosine of 64 over 1 equals Q over 34. Go ahead and cross multiply. This is a 3 right there. Q times 1 is Q. Go this direction. We have 34 times the cosine of 64. And we type that into a calculator. Let's go ahead and see what we get. So going back here and I'm saying I do not want to see a sine, I want to see a cosine. So 34 cosine 64 gets us 14.9. So 14.9 is the value of Q. 14.9. For the tan version, so I'm looking at E through H. Okay, so I am starting at my angle of 41. X is my adjacent. Go straight across. 12 is my opposite. Here's the hypotenuse, but I don't have to use it in this question. So I'm starting with the tangent of 41 over 1 equals opposite over adjacent, 12 over x. Go ahead and cross multiply. So x times the tangent of 41 degrees equals 12. Go ahead now and divide both sides by the tangent of 41. Again, your job is to get x by itself. So these are gone, so x will equal whatever this is. Time to plug it into a calculator. So, have my fraction, 12 divided by tan of 41, and we get out 13.8. So, in this case here, this end answer is approximately 13.8. So x equals roughly this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing in question F. I am starting with this angle right here. 15 is my adjacent because I am next to or attached to the 27, but I am also not the hypotenuse. If I go straight across, x is my opposite. So opposite adjacent, that's why I have to use tangent. So I'm starting with the tangent of 27 all over 1. And this equals x over 15, opposite over adjacent. I'm going to go ahead and cross multiply. 1 times x is just x, has to equal 15 times the tangent of 27. Calculator time. So we have 15 times tan of 27, and we get out 7.6. So in this case, x is approximately 7.6. Okay, so that is F. I'm going to go ahead now and show G. Okay, so we are starting at the 58 degrees. X is the adjacent, 22 is the opposite. This was the hypotenuse. So we are using tan of 58 equals opposite over adjacent, 22 over x. And don't forget, this is really divided by 1. And that's why I can go ahead and cross multiply. So I get x times tan of 58 equals 22. I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by the tangent of 58. So divide both sides by the tangent of 58. Again, that's part of my properties of equality. Okay, so those are gone. Now I'm just typing in that fraction into the calculator. 22 divided by tan 58. 13.7. So this final answer here is approximately 13.7. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do H. So we are standing at 37 degrees. X is the adjacent, 6 is the opposite, this is the hypotenuse. So I have tangent of 37 over 1 equals 6 over x. And go ahead and cross multiply. I have x times the tangent of 37 equals 6. Go ahead and, oops, let me set it up. Go ahead and divide both sides by tangent of 37. Again, your job is to get x by itself. Okay, so these tan 37s are gone. X will equal whatever this stuff is. That is still an A right there. Let's go ahead and type it into the calculator. So we had 6 divided by tan 37. I have 7.96. Now, think about this in terms of 96 cents. 96 cents will round you up to the next dollar. That 6 kicks you up a notch. 9 is already almost full. When I kick it up, I'm going to get a 10 because I'm carrying that 1 over. So instead of 7.96, I've rounded this whole thing up to the number 8. And again, that's just basic rounding stuff we would have learned back in middle school. Nothing new here. So I've got approximately 8. That is the value of x. So that is the end of practice H.